الآن يمكنكم المشاركة في مبادرة الأيام الرقمية تحت شعار انطلق بقوة مع جوجل، والتي يتناول فيها خبراء جوجل عناوين جديدة أسبوعيا مثل السحابيات، مهارات من جوجل، أندرويد، فلتر، ذكاء الآلة، فايربيس، ديزاين ثينكينج، مقسمة إلى دورات وورشات عمل يومية بالإضافة إلى مسابقات أسبوعية. شاهد الأيام الرقمية مباشرة على اليوتيوب وشارك رأيك وأسئلتك مع خبراء جوجل، واحصل على شهادة حضور في كل محاضرة تشترك فيها. هذا وأكثر من الأحد إلى الخميس ابتداء من الساعة 9 بتوقيت دبي عبر الرابط المبين youtube.com/gdgmena.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. الزلف الأول. Hello everyone. أهلا بكم في عدد جديد من أعداد MENA Digital Days، الأيام الرقمية برعاية جوجل. سأكون معكم بإذن الله عليان عبد النور، جي دي جي تيزي وزو الجزائر. السيشن اليوم بإذن الله ستكون حول كومبيوت انجن، وسأكون معكم خلال هذه الساعة. السيشن ستكون بالإنجليزي. إذا كانت لديكم أي أسئلة يمكنكم طرحها وسنجيب عليها بإذن الله. Hello everyone. الزلف الأول. I will be with you. I'm Aliane Abdenour, GDGT Zuzu from Algeria. And today we are going to talk about Google Cloud. We are going to learn new stuff about cloud computing, about Google Cloud, and a lot of stuff. And of course, if you have any questions, you can ask them in the comment or directly in the chat as we are live. So this series, if you are with us since the beginning, we try to make an application and host it in Google Cloud. So we are going slowly, step by step, until we will release a complete application that we will work on the cloud. And of course, we are going to explain all the steps with details. And if you have any questions, no problem. I will be with you every month, 2 times. I will be twice in a month. So we are going to do something together. So today we are going to talk about Compute Engine. What is this tool? How it works? All the details you need to know. So this is, as you know, this is what we call Google Cloud Console. So this is the console. Why I say console? Because a lot of people think this is a console. So when we say open the console, this is what people think. This is called, in Google Cloud, the equivalent of this is called Cloud Shell. And this is Cloud Shell. So the console is all this. Let me hide this. This is all the console, but this one is Cloud Shell. So Cloud Shell is where we are going to type commands. It's a virtual machine. It's a temporary virtual machine because we cannot host our solution here in Cloud Shell. This is like, let's say, another virtual machine, but it will not last forever. But to be able to use something that will last forever, here we need a special product that is called Compute Engine. And of course, there are many other products that allow us to host our application. But today we are going to talk about Compute Engine. And then in other sessions, we are going to talk about Cloud Function, Cloud Run, Kubernetes, and all App Engine and all the other solutions. So here is what I said about Cloud Shell. So this is a virtual machine, and it has 2 disks. So we have SDA and SDB. So SDB, for people coming from Linux, this is the part that is persisting, and the operating system, this is it. So every time we restart the machine, it gets reloaded. Everything we did, it gets deleted, but we can keep our files in home, and we have 5 gigabyte persistent, and everything is on 65 gigabytes. So if I try to do free, we have 60 gigabyte of RAM, and this machine is free. We don't pay anything for it, but we use it as a temporary machine, and we need to use that time to time. So let me quit this, and let me talk about what makes me host my application and make it persistent. So the product we are going to talk about it is called Compute Engine. Let me zoom. And, sorry, it's not zooming. Perfect. Now let's talk about Compute Engine. So before we talk about Cloud Compute Engine, we need to understand just a small thing, which is how the cloud is built. So in cloud, you will always find layers. So the first layer, this is called an infrastructure as a service, an IaaS. So every time you will find something, and then you will find A, and S. So this X will change every time. So you can find infrastructure, you can find platform, you can find database, you can find container, you can find a lot of things. And here, the most basic is the infrastructure. Why we call it the infrastructure? This is something like, hey, Google, give me the machine, but don't worry about everything else. I will handle everything. So just give me the hardware and put an operating system on this hardware and let me handle the rest. This is what we call the infrastructure. That means that we need to understand how networking works, how the operating system works, and all that stuff. But the platform as a service, this is more for developers. This is something like, I don't care about the operating system. I don't care about the network layer. I just care about my code. I want to program something on Node.js or Flask or Django or on PHP. And then I just need to plug my source code and then run it. So this is more about web developer, and this is what we call now serverless and infrastructure as a service. This is like something for sysadmins who want to take control over his machine. So Compute Engine, Google Compute Engine, GCE, this is an infrastructure as a service. And this is not only about the machine, but it's also about the network. And this session will be split on 2 sessions. The first session is the basics, and then we will continue in the other sessions, because 1 hour will never be enough to explain everything. So in reality, what we can do in Compute Engine, this is to create an instance. An instance, this is a virtual machine. So what we do in Compute Engine, we are creating virtual machines. And this is exactly what we can do with VMware or VirtualBox or Virt Manager. So let me show you, for example, the equivalent of Virt Manager. So as you know, Virt Manager, so if I come to Virt Manager / and Virt. For people who already used Virt Manager, you can use virtual machine exactly like you do in VMware, but now Virt Manager has been replaced with Cockpit. Cockpit, you can access it using localhost 1919. So I just type my name. I will show you something offline, and then I will go to Google Cloud. So what I will do with this, I will go to virtual machine, and then I access to my virtual machine. I just created an Ubuntu machine. I access to this machine. I just click here and then download, because it will ask me to download this client. And then when I do this, I will be able to run something on this machine. And as you can see, the machine became a window. This is, I can create as many machines as I have enough resources. For example, this machine has 2 GB of RAM. But if I want to create more machine, I will be limited by my machine RAM. For example, if I have 60 GB of RAM, I cannot create more than, for example, 8 or 6 machines that have 2 GB. So I'm always limited on my own machine. So what I do, I go to a cloud. So this machine, this is what we call on-premise machine. So an on-premise machine, that means that I host it in my local network. So for example, I'm in inside an enterprise and I need to create machines. I go and buy a strong server and then I host virtual machine inside this server. So the words we use is that if I buy a strong machine, this strong machine, this server, we call it a host. So the host, this is the real physical machine. And the virtual machine that we create inside this host are called guests. So always remember those terms. So guests is those machines, those virtual machine that I create inside this server. So the number of guests is always limited by the physical limitation of my host machine. So at a certain time, I will need to expand because my resource needs something more. So what I do, I go to a cloud provider like Google Cloud, and then I choose what is called an infrastructure as a service. So if I come here, I create an instance. So now I don't have limitation, any limitations. So if I come back here, I'm to my own resources. But here, it's an open world. I can create as many machines as I want. It depends now on my budget, because in cloud, the concept of cloud is that you pay for what you got. So let me explain you this data. Here, when I give you this example, the problem host must run 20. I bought it so I can run it for 24 hours. The problem is that I'm spending money on it. I spend electricity. I spend, for example, if the disk got broken, I must replace it. I need to upgrade the RAM. I am paying for money. But for the cloud, I only pay for what I am using, which means that if I am using 2 hours a day a machine, I will rent it for 2 hours. But here, even if I am using this machine 2 hours a day, the problem is that the host, I am paying for its electricity, and that's a problem. So what I do, I rent my machine and then I pay it for an hour. So let me show you. As I said, I will pay for what I use. So if I come here, the first thing I need to give him a name. So for example, MENA Digital Day Machine. And then it asks me to add labels. So labels are just here to organize my work. For example, I have 100 virtual machine. I need to split I need to give some labels to those virtual machines to split them and to make them easily searchable. For example, I search for web servers, database servers. So all those are just labels. And then I have this concept about regions and zones. So we said that Google Cloud, this is a cloud provider. So in Google Cloud, we have the concept that is called regions and zones. So let me open this in an image. Open image in new tab. And let me zoom so you can see what I'm talking about. So here is a region. So let me enable this pen. I'm on Linux, so in case you need this pen, this is called, let me disable it. So here is how it's called Gromit MPX. So in case you are using Linux, you can use this excellent tool to draw directly on your screen. So let me enable it. As you can see, this is called the region. So Iowa, this is US center. Why? Because it's located in the center of USA. And then we have East and West, and then we have regions in Europe. We have regions, as you can see, in Middle East. We have Doha and Dammam, Saudi wa Qatar. And then we have regions in Asia. Why there are so many regions? Because if I am here, I will choose the region that is near to me. And when I choose a region near to me, I will have smaller latency, because you need to know that now in 2022 and future, we don't care about the bandwidth. So the bandwidth, this is data, it's transiting like this. So the bandwidth, this is what we call the bandwidth. How many data can run in the same time? That's why we find, for example, megabit per second or gigabit per second. So how many bits can run at the same time within a second? But now the problem is that how much time I need to send data and bring it back. This round trip, this is what we call a latency. And gamers know what is the problem about latency. So if you have a bigger ping, you cannot play online games, because people will play and you will lose because you are not synchronized with them. So this latency, you need to go and come back. This is what we call latency. So when you are here, you will have smaller latency than going to USA. So if you choose a region that's near to you, this is best solution. So that's why Google is deploying regions. So the one in blue, they already exist. As you can see, Paris has already a new region, but the one in white, they are deploying in near future. So expect our session, and as soon as they will be available, we will tell you that. And then inside the region, we have what we call zones. So this is a region, and then it's split. Generally, there are 3 zones, and there are some regions that have 4 zones. So zone, this is like a data center. So imagine that we have a bigger region, and then we have a zone here, we have a zone here, and then we have a zone here. So resources are either global, that means that it's everywhere. So the global resource, for example, the network. Google network is global. We'll talk about this in details next session. And then we have resources that they are regional. That means that they can be deployed in a regional way. And then we have resources that are zonal. That means that those resources are only available in a certain zone. So every region, we try to make data replicated. So if we lose this region, then we need to use what we call multi-region. So we host our application here, for example, and then we host it here. Why? Because people from Middle East and North Africa, for example, they can access it directly here, and people from USA, they can access here. And if we lose this region, we still have this region. So for data redundancy and replication, for higher availability, we prefer to use multi-region. And even in one single region, if we have multi-zone, if we lose this zone, those zones are still available. So always think like this. We have global, and then we have regional, and then we have zone. So when we choose compute engine, we need to specify a zone. Why a zone? Because I said that the zone is the data center. So let me delete this, and let me come back here. So when we use, sorry, I used something like this. Okay, let's remove this. It's not capital letter. MENA. Okay, I must respect this regex. Now, if we want to create a virtual machine, an instance, here we choose first region and then we go to the zone. And as you can see, there is this logo here. So this logo means that it's low on CO2, and Google is the first one doing this. So all his data centers, they are trying to migrate them on all lower carbon. So if I choose US, why I need to use US Central One, for example, because you have what is called free plan. So if I come to free plan, Google Cloud, if you already see, if you are already here from the beginning in our sessions, I keep talking about this because in the free plan, if I come to compute engine, here, as you can see, those three regions are free. I can create an E2 micro. I will come back to this and explain this. But if you create a machine here, those are for free if you create this type of machine. Now, what is this type of machine? Let me come back here. So let's create, for example, in East one, because this is nearer to Algeria. And here is what we have in this. If you see, we have E2. So we have, let me show you a simple machine. And let me zoom a little bit so you can see what I'm talking about. So every time you create a machine on Google Cloud, you will find that it has a letter, a number, and then something. And then we will see another. Let me show you another example that's better. Here we are. So if I wanted to understand what is this, so if I have this, then the E2, this is the general purpose. It means that I don't need so much computation. I don't need a strong CPU, and I don't need so much memory. I just need a general balanced server. Here we use this type of machine that starts with E. And then we have standard, and then we have 2. And then we have here 4. And then we have here 8. So those numbers are how many vCPUs do we have. So if I say E2 standard 2, that means that I'm using a standard machine that has 2 vCPUs. But on the other hand, if I want to use something that has memory computation, as you can see, I have E2, so we are still in E2 machine, and then I have high mem 2. So the idea, so I have high mem and high CPU. What is the difference now between high mem and high CPU? If you notice this, so when it's balanced for each CPU, we call it vCPU because it's virtual. For each CPU, we have 4 GB of RAM. So if we have 2 vCPUs, that means that I will have 8. If I have 4, 4 multiplied by 4, it's 16. 8 multiplied by 4, this is 32. This is balanced. Now, if I want to give more power for memory, that means that for each vCPU, I will give it 8 GB of RAM. Now, if I want to give more for the CPU, I will reduce memory and give more power for the CPU. Now, why do I use this? Because to not waste money. Because if you bring something that needs a lot of computation, it needs a lot of CPU, you will, for example, you don't need so much RAM. Why do you need to rent a machine that has so much memory and then only pay for the vCPU? So here you need to understand your needs because there is no single model that fits for everyone. So you need to understand, why do I need my virtual machine? Do I need it for RAM For example, if you want to use HANA, which is a memory database, then you need a lot of memory. But if you need, for example, a lot of conversion, video conversion, and a lot of CPU intensive machines, then you don't need to use this high memory. You need to use high CPU and make your balance. So this one is general. Now, if you need something much more, because if I come here, for example, if I come to E2, the maximum that I can have is 32 here, 128, 128, 128. But if I come to memory optimized, for example, as you can see, I have 5 terabyte of memory. And here I have even 11 terabyte memory. Can you imagine? This is like a machine that it's impossible to have at home. This is, don't worry about this. This is not $33,000. Always remember, you are paying for an hour. You are not paying for a month. So in case you want to run something that has 11 terabyte of memory, it will cost you $67. And I will show you in a few minutes how I'm going to reduce drastically this number. So now if I need something that needs more computer than RAM, I will use compute optimized. And as you can see here, I can go until 60 vCPUs. So I will give more importance to vCPU rather than the memory. But if I come, as you can see, when it starts with C, that means compute. When it starts with N, that means memory. And I can use the GPU because I need, for example, some machine learning. So I need to put GPUs. So if I come to general purpose, I have to choose Intel or AMD. So if I choose E2, then I'm using the Intel. N2, this is Intel. But if I use the N2D and T2D, those ones are using AMD. So it depends on your needs. Some people like to use Intel, some people like to use AMD. But if I use this machine, T2D, this generation is called TAU, T-A-U. So if I come here, where did I... yeah, this machine is called TAU. This TAU is built on AMD and it offers the best ratio between price and performance. So we will do a special session about how we are going to optimize our budget choosing the right machine. And as I said, it will depend on our scenario because there is no model that will fit everyone. It depends on the scenario. So let's choose a general purpose and let me choose this machine that it's free, E2, and then this one. As you can see, this one is free. Remember, the E2 that has 2 vCPU and 1 giga memory, you don't pay for it. Even here, it's $7. We will change this. And if I come to the free tier, this one is for free. As long as I change this disk. Now, since I am using the cloud, that means that I rent something. That means that I need to customize what I am renting. So if I come here, by the way, even if you don't like those configurations, you can still make your custom machine. So you can choose the customize your own memory, your own CPU, and so on. So the first generation, if you see an old video on YouTube, they were using the N1. The N1, this is the first generation, and this one, this is it existed in Google Cloud since its launch, since they launched Compute Engine. So it's an old generation. As you can see, this is not 4 gigabyte by 1 vCPU. This is 375. So let's choose the one that is now standard, and let's choose the E2 Micro, which is free. Now, if I want now to use my computer in a way that will protect the memory, the RAM, it will encrypt the RAM. I can enable now this feature, but this feature, as you can see, it will need a special machine. So it will need the N2D. It will not work on the E2. So now, as I said, it depends on what you need, and not only on what you need. It even sustain you can gain some money by choosing some architecture. So if I come here, for example, as you can see, the N2D and the N2 can get a discount up to 20%, but if you choose the N1, you can have until 30% if you run it 24 hours a day. So we will see another session how we are going to optimize this. So remember, it's not only what you can get. Let me explain this straight. 2 giga of RAM, it will depend on the cloud. Even it's 2 giga of RAM, but it depends on the architecture behind this 2 giga of RAM. You are not going to pay the same 2 giga of RAM in AMD than 2 giga of RAM in Intel. And we are going to see all those details. Now, if I want to host a container, not a disk like Ubuntu, not an ISO, because when we create a virtual machine, generally we come here, let me create something, and then we do an ISO, we download the ISO, and then we create, and then we do browse, and we bring, for example, Ubuntu ISO, and then we install it. But sometimes I need to deploy a container. So here I can use something, it's like Kubernetes. We will see that in details in other sessions, but I can choose to deploy a container. Why? Because in case I have already a container and I don't need to bring a disk image, I can directly run a container. But we will see that in other session. And since I can customize a container, that means I can customize to my ISO. So if I do change, as you can see, I can install Debian, CentOS, and this is what happens if we host a container. So there is a special operating system that's called COOS, Container Optimized OS. For people coming from Red Hat, this is called the equivalent in Red Hat. This is called CoreOS, Fedora CoreOS. So CoreOS, this is an operating system that allows you to run containers. Even Ubuntu will run containers, but they are optimized for containers. So the Google version, this is called Container Optimized OS. You can run CentOS, you can run Fedora, you can run OpenSUSE, but you can also run a paid operating system like Red Hat or Windows Server or SQL Server. The good news about this is that you don't need to bring a license and say how I'm going to use that. Everything will be handled by Google Cloud. That means that, of course, you are going to pay for the license, but you don't have to worry about it because everything will be bundled. Or you can run a custom image that you created or a snapshot. A snapshot, always remember, a snapshot, it's incremental. There is a difference between a snapshot and a backup. But in cloud, since there are many regions, you can send the snapshot to another region that will not affect your current running disk. By the way, always think about backups, because now with the ransomware, the only way to do that is to do a backup. There is no solution right now. So always think about backups. Now, if I can use an existing disk, I will talk about this in a few minutes. Now, if I do a public image, notice one thing. This Debian, it's called public, but it's always patched by Google. So this is not the same as the Debian you download from ISO. There are small differences where Google will patch this and update it. But as soon as you install it, you need to patch it by yourself or do apt update and all that. But it's always a good idea. That's why we have a limited list, because those operating systems, they are trusted. So people say, where is Arch? Arch Linux, that's a different philosophy. You are not going to run a server on Arch and then worry about what we call how to update it, how to secure it, and all that. So now here we have 4 options plus 1 that I will show you in few minutes. We have balanced persistent disk, extreme persistent disk, but this one, it needs a special architecture in CPU, SSD persistent disk, and standard persistent disk. So if we choose standard, and then we come to the free tier, it tells me that if you use 30 gigabyte of standard disk, that's free. So let's put 30 gigabyte of disk. This one will be for free. And let's install, for example, the latest Debian, or we can choose, for example, Ubuntu. Let's bring Ubuntu and then install the latest one, 2204. So the latest LTS. Now, here is an idea. If you do this, keep boot disk. That means that if you delete your virtual machine, because as you can see, those disks are attached. That means that they are network attached. They are not physically attached like we use in daily life, like the one in my laptop, because I will show you this one in a few minutes. So since they are physical that we call a NAS, network attached storage. Since in reality they are SANs, not NAS, because it's used in fiber optics. So since they are attached using a network, that means that I can choose to delete the disk after I delete the virtual machine or keep it. Because if I keep the boot disk, and then the next time I can directly come here to existing disks and then choose the disk I kept. This is a good idea to create an image, to create a disk, and then use it again if you need to upgrade. So this is by default. If you delete your virtual machine, the disk will go. But if you change this, it will not go. You will always keep. Why this is the default? Because if you put something like this, extreme persistent disk, and then you put, sorry, if you keep the boot disk, you are going to pay for this disk. Even if you don't use it, the problem is that you are occupying, you are using storage. So that's why by default, if you decide to delete your resources, your compute resources, you need to delete the disk too, until you decide to do something else. So let's put something by default like this. Now, if I do keep, I will not pay for this 30 giga because it's free. Sorry. Now, since you are using a disk, then you decide how you are going to encrypt your disk. So you can choose, this is what we call encrypting at rest, because you have 2 types of encrypting. You have at rest and you have in transit. In transit, that means when you send your data, you need to encrypt it. Or at rest, that means that when they are in disk, you need to encrypt it. So if you need to let Google manage the key, then you choose the first option. Or you decide to bring another key, or you bring him your own key. But remember, if you lose the key, Google will not be able to recover this data because you encrypt it using your own key. So by the way, this key is also encrypted. That means that there is an encryption key, and then there is another key that encrypts this key. We will talk about the security in other session, don't worry. And then you decide at what time you are going to use a snapshot. You create a snapshot for your disk. So in case of problems, you can always roll back to another version. And by the way, a snapshot, contrary, the difference between a backup and a snapshot, here is it. So you have a disk, and then the snapshot creates an incremental way of your image. That means that this snapshot will not take time, because the only one that takes time, this is the first time you created. The other ones, it will only do the difference about what changed. But the backup, it takes the disk at a certain time, it creates another disk, and it creates another disk, and so on. So that's the difference between a snapshot and a backup. So a snapshot, this is just the difference, what's new. That's why we don't rely on them. But the fully backup, this is the whole disk, and then we create another copy of the disk. So we did what we needed in, sorry, so let me delete this. So here, I choose to rely on Google encryption key. I keep the disk, and then I select. Now, this is how we are going to enable or disable the APIs, because you need to know that when we use cloud, we are in reality using APIs. We are calling for some resources, create this, delete this, update this. So by default, the Google uses what is called the App Engine, Compute Engine Service Account, sorry. So before we talk about the service account, let me talk first about those, because those one are existed since the beginning of Compute Engine. So by default, all APIs are disabled, and you need to enable them one by one, or you enable all of them. So for example, Cloud Vision, Cloud Build, all those are disabled, or you decide what to enable and what to disable, one by one. But this is the old way. But the new way, it's using what we call Cloud IAM. This is Identity and Access Management. So the service account, this is like a person that does something for you. So instead of using a person that clicks here and enable this, disable this, you need a program that does something at your place. This is like, for example, when you go to Facebook and you enable some games, and then those games, they ask you to access to your friend list and all that, because they need to do something at your place. So those are what we call them service accounts in Google. So they are programs that delegate what you do manually. So every time you need to automate something, you will need what is called service account. And always, we will see that in Cloud IAM, always think about the least privilege philosophy. That means that you are not going to give a service account something that he will not need. Always give him only what he needs. And now the firewall, we will talk that later, because it's related. It's more about networking. Now, let me show you something about the disk. I told you earlier that there are 4 types of disk, but there is a 5th one, which is called a local SSD. So the local SSD, if I choose another machine type, so let's choose, for example, a tall machine, and let's give it, for example, 8 vCPU. And now, if I come to disk, let's choose another one. Let's choose, as you can see, the TOE doesn't have a custom image. So let's choose, for example, E2, but more like 32 vCPU. And let's come here. Does it give me? No. Okay, let's refresh. Maybe it's about this. As I said earlier, it depends on the type of the machine you are using. So every type of machine has its own way. So let's this by default, and let's come here, and let's come to the disk. Anyway, we will choose that, we will change that to another machine. Just so you know, the local SSD, this is physically attached to your machine. But there is a drawback about this, is that if you shut down your machine, you will lose this local SSD. So be careful. This is not a network attached SSD. This is always use this when you are sure that you are going to use your machine, always. And then you need a really fast data access, because since it's local, that means that it will be attached to your virtual machine. Local SSD. Now, if we come to security, here we can turn the secure boot, the VTM, TPM, all this, we will talk about them on security, but let me show you this management. Enable deletion protection. This machine, I will protect it in case I make a mistake and then I delete it. Now, if I come to this, if I choose spot, let me go back to the most expensive machine I have here. So memory, let's choose this, 11 terabyte of memory. And since I just need my machine to run for 1 hour, let me come to this option, VM, and then change from standard to spot. So this interface changed. You need to check what is called preemptible machine. Preemptible machine, this is a machine that lasts only for 24 hours. So as you can see, this is only $50. So this is like 70%. But if I store, this is $76. So as you can see, you can gain a lot. So if you need your machine for 1 hour or 2 hours, and then this machine is 400 vCPU, I even ignored 60 vCPU, and then you have this number of giga of RAM, and as you can see, this is illogical. This is like 10 gigabyte. You also need to make at least 40 gigabyte. And then, as you can see, you will only pay $50 an hour for a strong machine. But let's bring it back. So this is the preemptible spot. So if you need a normal machine, you just choose standard, and then this is the best thing you can have in cloud. Because of course, the host machine needs maintenance. That means that when there is a maintenance in the host, and you are, remember, the virtual machine is called the guest, and the host, this is a physical machine. That means that sometimes it needs some maintenance. Here, if you choose this, so when they maintain, upgrade and update the host, your machine will still run, unless you decide to terminate the VM instance. So when there is a maintenance, it will shut down and restart. It depends on what you use. So I will use this one. Of course, you will notice that it's slowing, because what happens is that when they do maintenance, your virtual machine will migrate to another zone, to another data center. And for people using virtual machine, VirtualBox and VMware, this is called teleportation, and every brand has its own name. So now we have this. Let me come back here. The metadata, we will need it a lot. So metadata, this is another server that handles a key value. So for example, sometimes you need to do some startup or shutdown scripts. You just put them here and put the value here. And this is handled by another server. So it's not inside this machine. So it's handled by another server that is called metadata server. So now, the sole tenancy now, this is when you decide to tell to Google to reserve for you a special server, a dedicated server. This is what we call a sole tenancy. So let me show you one thing. Where is it? Yeah, here, sometimes you need need to do some automation. For example, every time you create a virtual machine, you need to install Nginx. Here, you just do sudo apt update -y, because there is no intervention from you, and then you do sudo apt install Nginx. So what happens now, as soon as my machine gets created, Nginx will be installed. So let me change the type of machine. Of course, I'm not going to create this, E2, and then let's create this one, which is free. And then we will talk about the network and all that next session. So now, if I do create, it will create the machine. But if I want to use gcloud command, you just click here and it will give you the gcloud. By the way, the gcloud, this is the way how to use the SDK, using your own machine to create a machine by distance. Why? Because we are using an API. So you can create a machine directly from your own machine and you call Google Cloud remotely. Or you can use REST calls. And the REST calls for people using, for example, those REST tools, for example, Postman and all those tools, you can run this request and then it will ask you for credentials. You will log in using your Google Cloud and all that. So let's create this machine and then let's make it fast. Okay, while creating, let me read if there are any questions. Okay, let me check about the questions. Okay, so hello, hi, and yeah, Mohammed, how to proceed to enable the cloud option via the shell console? So this cloud shell, it's enabled by default. So if you create a Google Cloud account, you just need to click here. There is nothing to enable because it's a virtual machine and this is like a temporary virtual machine. So if I come here, let me show you this. If I go and create a virtual machine, and for example, I don't have a Google SDK in my own machine. So if I come to create a new instance, and yeah, with this zoom, okay, let's create a new instance. And then I come here at the end of the page, as I showed you earlier here, and then I click on equivalent in, okay, what did I forgot? Okay, everything is here, E2, enable, boot disk, everything is fine. And yeah, it was provisioning. And then if I copy this, I have two options. Either I come to my own machine and then type gcloud and all the commands that comes with it, but I need to install the SDK in my machine and I will use my own bandwidth. Sometimes maybe I don't have a good connection. So what I do, I come directly to Cloud Shell. Let me click on Cloud Shell and then I will just run this on my Cloud Shell. So it will use Google's connection, not my connection. So if I come here and then copy and paste the gcloud, it will use Google connection. Let me show you something. So for example, download, for example, Ubuntu. Let me copy the ISO and download it using the Google connection. So you can see how much bandwidth I have. For example, for example, Ubuntu desktop, and let's click on download. Okay, give me the link. Okay, let's copy the link. And then I don't have this bandwidth. So let me show you. If I do wget and then this, let's check. So as you can see, this is 200 megabyte by second. I don't own this. This is like Google connection. And as you can see, it finished in less than 5 seconds. So always use Cloud Shell every time you need something that you need to use on Google Cloud, but it's you don't need to download it and then re-upload it to Google Cloud. Just use Cloud Shell. And other questions? So do you have any other questions? Okay, waiting for your question. Let me come back to, let me close first Cloud Shell. Let me remove this. And then, since it's a Linux operating system that I just created, I will access using SSH. If it was a Windows operating system, then I will use RDP for remote desktop protocol. And as you can see, I have always an internal IP address. Do that. Let me hide this for a moment. I have always a local IP and an external IP. Those two, I will save them for the next session. I will access using SSH. And now I can type commands directly on this box. And by the way, when you host a server on the cloud and a server on any other place, always think about a headless server. That means that you don't need a graphical interface for your server, unless it's a Windows server. When it's a Linux server, forget to use X server, Xorg or Wayland or whatever. Okay, I'm inside this virtual machine. So if I do sudo apt update, I can update all my repository and then I can use this machine. So now I just created a machine that has, so let me do that. It has 1 giga of RAM and it's for free. So Google allocated this for me. And by the way, here is something that you need to understand. In Google Cloud Free Tier, when you come to, let me show you this trick. This trick is important so you understand how to bypass this thing. So when it tells you that this machine is for free, 24 hours, 7 days, 30 days in a month, that means that you multiply it by an hour. What does it mean? Is that if I use a calculator and then I said, let me, I hope I have a calculator here. I don't have a calculator. Yeah, I have a calculator. So if I calculate this, and then I do something like I buy it for 24 hours, 7 days, and 30 days a month. That means that I am paying this amount of hours. So 24, yeah. That means that I can create this number of machine and then use it for 1 hour. Let me show you something. So where is the, by the preemptible, non-preemptible? Let me show you some last thing. Yeah, your free E2 instance limit is by time, not by instance. That means that you can create many E2 and then use them. For example, you can create 30 machines for free and use them for 1 day. And then, of course, the 29 days, other days, you will pay for them. So this is the trick. If you want to use E2 for 1 hour, you can create, for example, 100 machine and you use them for 1 hour and it should be for free. Because as you can see, users calculation is combined across the supported region, but it's using the total hours. Not this is something like for 1 month. So if you consume, for example, you have one machine that must, two machines that must, or one machine that must run in 1 month. So the trick is to use 2 machines and then make them run by 50 days. And then use 4 machines and make them run for 1 week and so on. So do your calculation. Okay, can I use a 3D game using cloud? Yeah, sure. Because cloud, you are renting resources. For example, you need GPU, you need a lot of calculation, and then you have just a simple laptop. Then you go and rent your machine on the cloud, and then you just use your machine to type the commands. That's it. You just need to type the commands, and everything will happen on the cloud. And this is the magic of cloud. That means that you don't need to have a strong machine. The strong machine is already in the cloud. What you need, you just need to type remote commands. So if you need, for example, Windows, that's fine. You go and take Windows Server, install everything on Windows Server, get a strong machine, and then access using RDP, and then access to your machine, and then you can even have your GPU and have a strong machine. By the way, when we are talking about the cloud, there is a product here that is called Compute Engine, Migrate for Compute Engine. So Migrate for Compute Engine, it will help you to transit from your local on-premise to the cloud. Why I'm talking about this? Because there is, for example, the news about VMware. It was bought by another big brand, and even the subscription changed. So there is even a service here that is called VMware Engine, where you can directly convert your VMware solution and bring it to Google Cloud. And everything will be in the tutorial. You just need to follow. So if you have vSphere, you just need to get to this page. And as you can see, so let me zoom. I disabled this API because I'm not using it. So Google VMware Engine is fully managed service that allows you to run VMware platform on Google Cloud. The solution include vSphere, vCenter, vSun, NSX, and HCX, and so on. So the idea is to use Google IIS to convert your on-premise and make it run directly on Compute Engine and VPC, Virtual Private Cloud, and all that. We will talk about the networking next session, inshallah. So do you have any question before we end this session? Okay, so this is the basic of Compute Engine. And of course, there are the instance group and all that. We will talk about them in next session when we get to the network side. So if you have any question, if you don't have them, then see you next week, inshallah. Thank you very much. Tanvir Tanwin was with you, Aliane Abdenour. Thank you very much.